Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to talk about ending the cycle of father wounds. As you know, the absence of a loving, engaged father can leave a child with lifelong wounds. And with generations of father wounds, the cycle can just keep repeating itself. But it doesn't have to. Today, Dr. DrSlaughter chats with Bob Reccord. He is an author, speaker, and founder of Total Life Ministries, and a specialist in fatherlessness and ending the cycle of father wounds.
I am so glad to have Bob Reccord with us today. This is the first time Bob and I have met, but it's a wonderful meeting because you and I have some things in common.
We do, Jim.
And really makes it so much more enjoyable when that happens, to
So
get together
true.
to talk. Bob, your ministry is so rich through the years, and you've made such an impact on numerous people as God led you in different forums. Thank you for coming again to be with us. God has really led you in some very specific ways, empowered you, filled you, and used you. And so, again, it's a privilege to have you with me today. We are going to address the topic today in particular of fatherlessness. And your book in particular intrigued me, Ending the Cycle of Father Wounds, Hope for Healing and Preventing, I love this, the way you put this, preventing infections caused by relational wounds. I thought that's an interesting way to put it, a great way to put it. I mean, because wounds cause, or at least are subject to infection.
Absolutely.
The world has gone through a time where we were very concerned about infectious disease with the virus and all. But
right.
I'd like to just ask you basically, where would you like to start? And take us into a bit of an understanding about fatherlessness and what a huge, important topic this is for us.
Well, thank you so much for the honor, Jim. And I want to say, first of all, to anybody who's listening, especially who's a male, you may have a lot of titles throughout your lifetime, in your work, in your military, whatever it may be. But there is a title, actually there are three titles that I think are by far and hands down the most important a man will have in a lifetime. That is husband, dad, and granddad. Yeah. Those leave everything else in the dust.
Boy, they do.
So to all of you as men, I want to just say kudos, congratulations, and just now past Father's Day, I want to say how important they are because the saying is the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, often talking about moms. Right. And this year, $29 billion was spent on Mother's Day for gifts and calls and all that.
Wow.
And for dads, it will come to a few neckties. So it's a big discrepancy, Jim.
They're huge. Yeah, it's huge.
But research shows that when a dad is present and engaged with the life of a child, without question, that life of a child becomes healthier, happier. It is far more agile in mental dexterity, in empathy, and in social relationships as it grows. Its marriage will be far more successful than where a dad was absent. When it's a girl involved as a daughter, she will be 4 times less likely to practice sex early, and she will be 2 times less likely to get pregnant before marriage. Dads, listen to me. Granddads, you make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have 2 daughters.
Yeah.
That proved to be true with us. I'm just grateful to God for that connection that we've had. What moved you to do more research in this field of fatherlessness, father wounds, that kind of thing? What got you into that topic?
Oh, thanks for asking. In the book, in chapter 7, I actually talk about my own journey. And my own journey was that as I was being carried to term in a pregnancy, my mom's health started to deteriorate. Some friends quietly said to her, why don't you not take this to term? It'll be safer for you. But she believed that God alone had the right to give and take life, so she took me to term, but it would cost her a lot because when I was 11 months old, she would die. That would leave me with an alcoholic dad who, with 2 brothers who were slightly older than me, one a year older, one 2 years older, didn't know what to do with us, Jim, and for sure was pretty convinced he didn't want us. So he would throw us from house to house, place to place, and life went from bad to really bad. I would later get adopted, and you would tend to think, wow, what a great ending to the story. But My adopted father had been an illegitimate child of a 45-year-old rape of a 15-year-old girl. He was disavowed. He was abused. He was ended up raised by a alcoholic granddad and a very dysfunctional grandmother. He was in a gang by the time he was 13, critically stabbed in a fight by the time he was 16. Now he's my adopted dad. So you can imagine the things he brought into that relationship. So I would say to everybody who's listening, while for many, Father's Day is a great experience, there are also others, and many by number, that Father's Day is a struggle for because they look back and they say, that relationship with my dad, my stepdad, my adopted dad or a father figure just wasn't what I hoped it would be. There was a distance, there was a strain, there was a disappointment, there was a hurt, there was a wound. And Jim, here's the bottom line, you brought it up. A wound physically is something that penetrates the surface skin and damages the tissue underneath. And unless treated, as you so well referred to, that wound will become infected, and often the infection is far, far worse and far-reaching. Now put it into a relational position. When a dad, a stepdad, a adopted dad, a father figure, by an action, by words, or, boy, here's an important one, by inaction, wounds the child, and that wound penetrates the surface of the relationship and damages the tissue underneath. What's the tissue? A sense of adequacy, a sense of security, love, an ability to have a meaningful, deep, growing relationship, trust. When those are wounded, we can say, don't worry about it because time heals all wounds. But Jim, you and I both know that time does not heal all wounds unless the time is used very proactively to correct the wound.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the things that I love doing is speaking to men. And in the last 15 years, I've spoken to over 300,000 men. But I noticed a lot of them were carrying baggage, stuff from the past. And I began to look into it. I began to ask questions. And one question rose above all the others. Here was the question. Regardless of whether the crowd was 100 men or 10,000 plus men, how many of you had a dad or a stepdad or a father figure in your life as you grew up who regularly told you they loved you, and they meant that unconditionally, who told you they were proud of you, not for how you performed academically, athletically, but for who you were. That's why they were proud of you. And they regularly worked hard to be present at events that were important to you as the child, not just comfortable and enjoyable for them.
Great point.
Here's the result. It staggered me. The highest positive response, Jim, I ever got from any crowd was 35%, which meant 65% said, that wasn't me. It was more normally 30% or below, which said a lot of men go into adult life carrying strains, disappointments, hurts, distance in relationship with a dad, a stepdad, a father figure. And we think in America, Jim, of fatherlessness as being a dad who physically is absent.
That's what first comes to mind.
That's sure important because 1 out of 3 kids in America under the age 18 will grow up some part of that 18 years without the presence of their biological father. But it's not just physical. There is a fatherlessness emotionally. There's a fatherlessness spiritually. There is a fatherlessness relationally, where a dad can be present, but when he's present, he's not really present.
Yeah, they can't see me, but if they could, they would see that I'm shaking my head in affirmation and confirmation of that. Ann and I are in the counseling and life coaching ministry right
Thank
now.
God.
And we see so much of this, and I'm so glad that I have a chance to interact with you, read your material, kind of probe you a little bit about this, because it's going to come in very, very importantly handy for me as I deal with guys. And so that's the thing. And so thank you again. Physical absence, it makes a difference. Often it is absence in other ways.
And in the book, I go into what is a father wound. A lot of people will say, how do I know whether I have any father wounds. Well, we just launched yesterday a brand new, very robust website, and you can just go to it at bobreccord.com, B-O-B-R-E-C-C, that's two C's, C-C-O-R-D, bobreccord.com. And right there on the front homepage, Jim, there is a picture of the book, Ending the Cycle of Father Wounds, and it says, we're proud to make available an assessment, a self-assessment. Somebody can download it right at home, and it tells you how to go through it. It tells you how to assess your relationship with your dad, stepdad, adopted dad, father figure, and then how to tally it. And depending on the number you get of the self-assessment instrument, it says you're pretty likely to have father wounds, or all the way to there don't seem to be any indication here of father wounds. You ought to tell your dad how thankful you are that you don't have any.
Absolutely.
And we wanted to help people have a self-assessment tool, an instrument that is not infallible. It's not perfect. It's an indicator, just like a doctor's tests are, that can say, hey, this may be an issue with me. And if they want to get the book, they can get it right there from the bookstore at the same site at bobreccord.com. So we want to make it real easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have. And I tell you, one of the first things I'm going to do and we're at the NRB, National Religious Broadcasters Convention. And after this is over, I'm going to go right to that website and I'm going to take that assessment, right? And by the way, I was pronouncing your name incorrectly. It's Record, not Record. Yep. I had a 50-50 chance of being right. And of course I was.
I've been called a lot worse.
Well, I understand. Yeah. Me too. Again, the name of the book that we're talking about is Ending the Cycle of Father Wounds by Bob Record.
And Jim, in it, I tell my story so that people can understand. I know what I'm talking about because I've lived it.
Yes, sir.
Plus, I've had to help a lot of other men walk through it. And we go into, so if you do have father wounds, what do you do about it? Because you can't just ignore it.
Right.
Time doesn't heal all wounds. Time wisely invested doing the right things, as you well know as a coach and counselor.
Absolutely.
That's what heals the wounds.
Yeah. And that was a question that I had, that if we could get into it a little bit, that'd be great. And that is, I take the assessment or otherwise discover that I have a father wound, and even that it has affected me. And so a couple of questions might be, one, how do those affect us? You've mentioned a couple of things about that. But then also, what do I do about it, to begin the recovery process?
Right. Well, for instance, in girls, when a girl has a father that is physically not there or disengaged emotionally and relationally, even if he's around some, she will grow up to have three major fears. She will have a fear of rejection. She'll have a fear of commitment and making that commitment. And if she does, will it just break down? And a fear of abandonment. So she'll go into her marriage or into her relationships with men fearing all three of those things. Whether she ever talks about it or not, they'll be there because it's been proven by research over and over.
Wow.
Guys go in and they will respond different ways. Some will just shut down. Some will get angry. Some will say, I'll guarantee you I'll never do what I experience. And then you know what happens.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They exactly end up emulating too often what they experienced and were modeled when they grew up. Because here's the issue, as Jim so well knows, as I know, and men, you need to understand. All of us do what we see modeled far more than we do what we hear taught. And so if you were modeled a dad who was not dynamically engaged and constantly, regularly told you he loved you and how proud he was of you and to be your dad and thankful for that and was present for major events, the likelihood is, whether you want to or not, you will end up emulating that because that's what you were modeled, regardless of what somebody tells you.
We are back with Bob Record on his book, Father Wounds and His Own Recovery.
I was just coaching, as you so well do, beautiful job in coaching so many. I was coaching a man who's an executive, and he's having trouble with anger issues at his home. And I said, tell me why you think this is happening. And he said, I just can't help it. It's out before it happens. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, well then let me ask you this question. What do you do at work when you get really frustrated, aggravated, you're really teed off with your boss, a colleague who's a real key player, it just crosses you or blindsides you? What do you do there? He said, well, I don't do anything. I deal with it. I said, oh, so what you're telling me is you can control it at work, but you choose not to control it at home. You just say you can't, when the reality is what you're really saying is you won't. Mm-hmm. And to the people who love you and walk with you most, you tend to let it fly on, but the people where you work, somehow you control. So don't you think it's a choice? He got real quiet.
I bet.
And he backed up, and boy, I'm seeing great choices made. So that's one of the things I want to say to us as men. What do you do? Well, first of all, you have to admit there was a challenge, a problem. Right. And I've had a number of guys say to me, I didn't think I had a problem with father wound, or I thought I had dealt with it. And then I read the book and I realized there was still some stuff undone. You got to admit it and say, okay, it's there. Then you've got to make a choice. And the choice is, am I going to become a victim of it, or am I going to be a victor over it by the choices I make?
Such a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the guy's got to draw a line in the sand because they end up being cyclical, I said, ending the cycle of father wounds. And the reality is if we as men don't deal with any father wounds or strains or disappointments or tensions that were back in our past, we tend to carry them into our future with our own kids, wife, and then eventually grandkids. So it becomes generational.
Well, it really does, and tremendously complicates the life picture.
Really does.
Really does, absolutely. Why don't you give us that website again? Could you mention that to us again?
Absolutely.
Because there are people out there who are wanting to write it down but missed it the first time.
Yeah, sure.
So that would be
it's
great.
real simple. It's just my name. It's www.bobrecord, and it's BOBRECCORD.com. And that's where they'll find the self-assessment tool for free. That's where they can order the book. And it may be not just for you, the listener. It may be for somebody you know.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
It goes into step by step how you deal with father wounds, and especially in the area of forgiveness. And one of the distinctions that I make in the book is when you look at the Bible, what does it say not only forgiveness is from God's view, that's important to understand and how to do it, but every bit as important is what does it say forgiveness is not? Because in our culture, we confuse a lot of things that really aren't forgiveness with forgiveness. Let me just show you one real fast. One is, I've forgiven him because I tolerate him every time he walks in or is around me. So I just grit and I bear it, and nothing in the Bible says that has anything to do with forgiveness. Or it's a temptation to minimize something. I was wounded, I was hurt, I was disappointed, there was tension, there was a struggle between me and my dad, my stepdad, my father figure, but it was no big deal. Then why does your sphincter muscle tighten every time he comes around or is mentioned? Come on. So let's deal with what forgiveness is not, but then let's look at what Bible says forgiveness really is and how it can work, and we do that in the book.
Well, and it sounds to me from what you're saying that you consider the forgiveness component to be a huge part of recovery from this fatherlessness situation, state.
Yeah, it was for me, because here's what happens when I hold hurt, woundedness, disappointment, tension, anger, even bitterness in my heart, Jim. It's like me drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. Doesn't work very well.
No, that doesn't work at all. It also seems to me when we do that, we will be kind of enabling that wound to fester.
What a great point.
To fester.
Oh, what a great point.
And
absolutely.
So,
Stay right here. We'll be right back with more on recovering from father wounds. We are back with Bob Reccord on his book, Father Wounds, with Dr. DrSlaughter.
If you were modeled a dad who was not dynamically engaged and constantly, regularly told you he loved you and how proud he was of you and to be your dad and thankful for that and was present for major events, the likelihood is, whether you want to or not, you will end up emulating that because that's what you were modeled, regardless of what somebody tells you.
Well, and the thing is, kind of ironic, really, when you think about it, but even though we may commit never to being like that, if there was not a good relationship like that, even though we know we don't want that, we don't want to do that, we commit not to doing it, we do it anyway.
Yeah.
And so whether it's subconscious or whether it's driven by the flesh, what we might call the false self or something like that, it seems to me that it's really, really, well, almost absolutely crucial that we find out about ourselves. You know, we go back and we think that through and then make whatever adjustments we need to make to get on board a better track, you know? Yeah, it's such an encouragement to us, an exhortation, really, to think this through for ourselves. Yeah. And like you said, not just guys who believe they had a wonderful dad who ministered to them in this way. Right. It's important for them to think that through, too.
Right.
Everybody needs to think about it. Because there can be vestiges when we may not even know it, and it may ooze out, you know, in different ways. So this particular, you're a fairly prolific author. You've really helped us out in many, many ways with the books you've written. That's one of my problems. You know, I'm a reader, and so I run into somebody like you, and I add to my list, you know, the things that I want to get into, and I will do that. This book in particular, Ending the Cycle of Father Wounds, by Bob Reccord. And Bob, again, thank you so much, and we look forward to the assessment. We want to do that. Thanks. And encourage everyone to do that, and then to pick up a copy of your book and get into that. Believe that will really contribute to a richer Christian life. Yes, sir.
If you're a dad or a granddad, remember that when Jesus started his earthly ministry, it says that the Holy Spirit, God the Father, came to the baptism, and they literally heard a voice saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." He acknowledged the Son was his Son. Yes. So if you have a son, a grandson, a daughter, a granddaughter, make it so proud and so delighted when you introduce them and say, "This is my son, this is my granddaughter." Wow. And just ooze that blessing out. It gives them a sense of belonging. It gives them a sense of blessing. And then he said, and listen to him. He gave him credence publicly in front of others. And when you're in front of the friends of your son, grandson, daughter, granddaughter, brag on them to their friends. Brag on them in front of people. Tell them how proud you are of them, how much you love them, what an honor it is to be their dad or their granddad. I want to tell you, it will pay you back in spades, and it will change the life of your son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter.
Well, I appreciate that so much. I was thinking, I'm glad that you shared that as something that you wanted to add to what we'd already done. Anything else in particular that comes to mind to you? My guess is that you've seen a lot of people grow immensely through this teaching and training that you do.
Well, and I'm one of them who had to grow. I had to determine, was I going to be a victim or a victor? And a line had to get drawn in the sand.
Yeah.
I would say to every dad, granddad, a few things. Number one, there's no perfect dad or granddad.
I'm so glad you said
We're
that.
all going to screw up. I mean, royally. And if we don't think we are, just ask our kids or our wife.
Boy, that's the truth. No kidding.
They'll tell you. So, listen, every dad, every granddad's going to make mistakes. Number two, everybody can change course. But it's a decision.
Yes.
It's a decision. And I often say, Jim, decisions set directions that lead to very predictable destinations. Decisions set directions that lead to very predictable destinations. So, Dad, Granddad, the decisions you make about what you're going to do, about a mistake, a wound, a hurt, a disappointment, a tension, etc., will determine the direction that's going to move forward and the destination you ultimately end up. The last thing I'd say, Jim, is some say, it happened back then. Today's now. It's too late. It is never too late to change course.
Yeah, such a good point. Really a good point. Because you give hope to people, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And just a couple of things in particular that I was thinking about, and that is that, like what you said, it's a choice.
Right.
Right. And we have a choice to make. And it's important for us to realize that. And so I wanted to emphasize that again.
Yeah.
And then
and
also,
we're not a product of our environment or our culture or our upbringing near as much as we're a product of our decisions.
And, you know, one of those decisions that it might be important to mention, too, I think, is the decision to put my life in the hands of God through Jesus Christ, my Savior,
exactly right.
to be moved by His Spirit in whichever direction He wants to move. I tell pretty much everybody who comes in to see me that God is your most powerful resource, right?
So true.
And so we want to get that straight right away when I
Couldn't
talk to
agree
them.
more.
And that's important, you know, for people to hear as well. I'm sure and I believe there's so much good information in your book and in the different kinds of materials that you put out about what to do, when to do it, decisions to make, and that kind of thing. And I know that you probably deal with the spiritual element, and so I just wanted to mention that.
We sure do.
You know, God is at work, and it's so crucial for us to know that.
Absolutely. And we also deal in there what happens if your dad has passed away or if your dad can't be found. What do you do then? And that is dealt with in the book. But the game changer you put your finger right on is Jesus Christ. Absolutely. I found I could not do this alone.
And I have found the same thing as well. And it seems like the harder I work at doing it myself, the more futile it becomes, you know.
So true.
And finally, I'm learning as I go, you know, to just seek God's face, to move towards Him, to ask Him. You know, David, in one of his most crucial situations, said, "I asked the Lord, shall I go up or shall I not go up?" And God says, "Don't go up right now."
That's exactly
and then
right.
He said, "When you hear the sound of marching in the trees, then you go up," right? And so I've begun to really work on applying that in my own life, you know. And I believe that in whatever way you do it, that you have too. And God's given you lots of success. You attribute it to Him. And Bob, let me just say thank you again so much for your time.
What an honor.
Well, it was an honor for me to get to be with you. And again, just feel like we have some things in common that are really remarkable. It showed me that, you know, God will take you and move you in this direction. God will take me, move me in that direction.
Absolutely.
And together we comprise the ministry of Christ. And so that's exciting to me, and I really love that. I, again, really appreciate your coming. Value your experience, value the impact of your ministry through the decades, and value just getting to be your friend. And so
what a delight.
Would love to be in contact. Shake my hand again.
Love
there
it.
You go.
And may God bless you and Ann, and as you pour into the lives of so many.
Thank you so much. And we ask the same of the Lord for you as you go. Would love to be in touch.
I would love it.
So maybe we can do that in some way in the
It'd
future.
be an honor.
Okay. It would
Count
be for
on
me. Me too. Good deal. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Take care. God bless. And we'll see you next time.
Wow, that was a great interview you did with Bob Reccord.
Thank you. Bob is such a wonderful guy, and he has provided such a great resource for us, not just fathers, but for everyone who is a member of a family. And of course, that would be every single person, right, in some sense, but reminding us about the power of a father's presence and his love.
I loved so many things he said. Now, I know that you guys were targeting men with father wounds. But every woman I see practically has father wounds as well.
You're right. It's not just something that's passed on. The wound is passed on to sons. It also happens to daughters as well. And I know you spend lots of time with women working on that relationship with their dad, really trying to discern what has happened to them in light of their relationship with their fathers.
Yes, and my dad traveled a lot. He sent gifts and did his best. Right?
Right.
But for me, what I noticed is my love language is, my main one is quality time. Right? And so I really needed him there. And he didn't start really being there until I was about 27. And then he started treating me like a dad would. And I'm like, Dad, I'm like an adult, right? And so now he's 90. He spent many, many decades making up for that. And that's been incredible. And I wish more and more people had that opportunity when dads reach their career height, like Kevin Malone talked about.
Right.
That he finally got to the top of the ladder and he realized this ladder was on the wrong building.
Yeah, leaning on the wrong wall, right.
And he was the general manager for the Dodgers.
Right.
Right?
Yep. And so, this has given me some thought too about my dad, but you mentioned your dad. Honestly, your dad has become almost a second father to me. I mean, he has done for me and been to me, some things that any son would want their dad to be. He has invited me to enter his world. He has invited me to participate in things that mean a lot to him, collections and things like that. He's introduced me to a number of new pursuits, and it's been just a wonderful thing. And I really appreciate him. My dad was not always there either. When I was young, and he was in a profession, real estate, called him to be out usually over the weekend. And so when I was free, he wasn't. I took him into the evening a lot, but there were some things that he did do for me. And I think he was maybe aware of the need that I had for him. And so Bob's book and the interview and talking to him gave me an opportunity to think about my own dad, because he did some things right. So. And
that's good to let them know, because one of the things that you said to me when I asked about your dad, if you had any father wounds, and I did not know what was going to come out of your mouth, right?
Yeah.
Because your dad seemed so cool to me, right? But you said he never harmed you.
Right.
And I was like, what? Like you said never.
I can't remember a time ever when my dad harmed me, when I would say, whatever he did or said was harmful to me. Whenever he could, he went to church with us. He worked with me on school projects. He went to my games. He was always fair with me. And that's something that dads sometimes have a hard time being, is fair with their kids. We react rather than respond. My dad never seemed to react towards me in a negative sense. And so I never felt harmed by him. And I'm just so glad to be able to say that. That's not true of every son or every child.
Yeah, because, I can think of a couple of times my dad spanked me, with a switch when I was young, a couple times. And I actually talked to him about that. He goes, I didn't do that. I'm like, yes, you did, over mashed potatoes, because I hid them in my napkin when I was little. He's like, are you sure? I said, yeah. So, but other than that, I think my mom would have him discipline us when he got home, which wasn't fair to him.
Wasn't fair to him, and wasn't fair to you, because it put him in a kind of a negative light, probably in your head.
Yeah, she quit doing that, but it was odd as a child for my dad to come home and then all of a sudden spank me when I don't even know what in the world happened with him, that he would have spanked me. So as a kid, it's very hard to understand that. So I'm glad they quit that. But when I thought of the fact that he didn't harm you, I thought then there was nothing like that. He sat you down and had talks with you. Yes. And
he never laid a hand on me. Let me just say that. Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
Never did that. And, but he would do it with consequences, really. He didn't really, honestly, he didn't ever sense that he had to do that a lot with me. But there are times when he would say, okay, we're going to do this then. And it was in light of something that I had done that wasn't a good thing. And, so he would take something away. He would deprive me of privileges that I'd had, something like that. And, believe me, I knew he would do it well. He knew what he was doing. And so that would be enough for me. So yeah. And he listened to me. He didn't anger easily. He was always fair with me, I thought. So those are important things for dads to remember.
And the Boy Scouts were very memorable for you. He went on the Boy Scout trips with you.
Yeah, scouting was a big part of my life. In those days, that program was very different from what it's become today. And it was really a great program for making men out of boys, really. Mm-hmm. And my dad was a part of that. It was very difficult for him to take a whole weekend and go on a scout camp out with me, because weekends were major work times for him, but he made every effort to go with me on as many campouts with our Boy Scout troop, and we would go all over different places. And I remember that was a thing that he did with me that was very important to me. He worked with me on different levels of rank in scouting, and that was a very important part of my life with him.
So you had some verses that were very important to you about fathering.
Yes. I mean, when we first started talking about this with Bob Reccord, I realized that, the Bible, it gives some good instruction to fathers and to parents in general. But two particular verses that came to mind to me were in the New Testament. There are passages in the Old Testament. One is Ephesians 6:4. I thought I might read that because it's so important for us, and then one in Colossians. The Ephesians passage says this: Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training or the instruction and the admonition or the counseling. I love that thought. Would love to pursue that sometime, of the Lord. The Ephesians passage says this: Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training or the instruction and the admonition or the counseling. I love that thought. Would love to pursue that sometime, of the Lord. And what I wanted to focus on was just the idea that fathers aren't to exasperate their children. You know what that word means? It means enrage them. It's a strong word about anger. It's translation is make them angry, but it's not just make them mad. It's enrage them. I mean, and some fathers actually end up provoking their children to be angry and angry people. And this is an admonition against that. Instead, teach them in the way of the Lord. Counsel them in the way of the Lord. And so that's something that fathers, I think, really need to remember. You want to be a good dad? Look at Ephesians 6, and that verse 4 is really a good one for us. Colossians 3:21 is the corresponding passage from Paul, and he says, "Fathers," this is Ephesians 3:21. "Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged." Embitter there, or perhaps resentful would be the word I was searching for. Resentful. Don't make your children resentful or embittered. You can do that, or they will become discouraged. They will become perhaps depressed even. And so fathers have a lot of impact, and in some ways they kind of can determine where their sons and daughters will go.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now we were talking about Ephesians 4. Or was it Ephesians 6:4? That's right. 6:4.
And really important one. I tell you what, we run into a lot of very, very angry people in our clinic and in our work. And people sometimes will even, in their awareness of that, and they've run into trouble because they're so angry. And often we'll discover that there's a direct father component to that. I had a student in seminary at one time, and I remembered him when we talked about this. He was an all-state basketball player. And, that's really hard to achieve, be an all-state basketball player. And that's a great, great honor to be selected for that. And he asked to see me after class one day. And we sat down just at a desk there and started talking. And he burst into tears. And we're talking, this is a graduate school student. This is an adult here, right? And he just talked to me. He said, "My dad never came to a game of mine, never came to one of my games." And he just sat there and he needed to unload that and talk about it. And he knew I'd listen to him. And so we talked about it. And who knows? I don't know what the message or the lesson was that day. It may have been in one of these passages, but he just came up. He needed to, this was such a burden for him, such a hole in his heart. And he wanted to unload that. He wanted to talk about it. And he had never processed it completely. But I sat there thinking, how could a dad have a basketball player who is so good and never attend one game? How could that happen? But it certainly was a message to me, and it should be a message to all of us when we hear stories like that, how important it is to give our time to our kids.
Yes, I do believe that. And I think everyone we've talked to about fathering tells us that. The holes that it can leave, the wounds that it can leave. So if you have wounds out there, please go to bobreccord.com, BOBRECCORD.com, and take the assessment to see about your father wounds and buy the book, download the book. He has an ebook too, Ending the Cycle of Father Wounds. And that way you can recover and live a healthy, wonderful life with your children.
Right. It's a great book. And one of the things that's so good about it is that he offers some exercises in there, some thought producing or thought provoking exercises. And so that's very helpful.
Yes, because we don't want you to get to the top of the ladder someday and be on the wrong wall.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Next week, we have a wonderful lady that is facing life after losing her children and her husband. And she has a ministry, a wonderful book and movie made about her life. And we will be talking to her next week on her whole ministry and her book, Miracles in Action. Until then, remember, keep getting better.